Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a subject that, let's be honest, can feel a little scary: organic chemistry. But what if I told you it's not about memorizing millions of different compounds? What if it's really about learning a simple, kind of elegant code? Okay, let's jump right in and see. So, does this whole subject, with all its endless reactions and crazy long names, just seem overwhelming? Look, you are definitely not alone. But here's the secret. All that complexity you see is actually built on just a couple of very simple foundational ideas. And by the end of this, you're going to have the keys to unlock it. So, where do we even begin? Well, we have to start with the absolute hero of this story, the element carbon. Almost every single molecule that matters in this field has carbon right at its heart. So if you can understand carbon, you're taking the first and honestly the most important step. And that brings us to the big question, right? What is it that makes this one element so incredibly special? How can it form the backbone of everything from the plastics we use every day to the fuels that run our cars, all the way to the DNA inside our own bodies? The answer is actually surprisingly simple, and it all boils down to two unique abilities. These two properties right here, this is the entire secret to organic chemistry. Seriously. First, tetravalency just means carbon loves to form four strong bonds, making it this amazing, stable connector. And second, catenation, that's its total unique superpower to link up with itself over and over, forming these massive chains, branches, and rings that create this unbelievable variety of structures. And this is just the perfect example of carbon's bonding power in action. Just think about a diamond and the graphite in your pencil. One is literally the hardest substance we know, and the other is so soft and flaky it leaves a mark on paper. And guess what? They're both 100% pure carbon. The only difference is how those carbon atoms are arranged. It's an amazing illustration of how structure completely defines what something is. All right, so we get why carbon is the star of the show. Now we've got to learn how to speak its language. And that means understanding the different ways chemists draw all these complex structures so they can communicate clearly and, not spend all day drawing. I mean, think about it. With literally millions of possible compounds, trying to draw every single one out in full detail would be, well, impossible, right? So how do scientists show them in a simple, standard way that everyone in the world can understand? Well, they developed a kind of chemical shorthand. So first up, we have the most detailed map, which is the complete structural formula. As you can see with butane here, every single atom, every carbon, every hydrogen, and every single bond connecting them is drawn out. It's perfectly clear, for sure, but for a really big molecule, this would take forever to draw. So to make life a little easier, we use the condensed formula. See how the hydrogens are now kind of bunched up with the carbon they're attached to? This is way faster to write, absolutely perfect for when you're in an exam and the clock is ticking, but it still shows you exactly how everything is connected. And finally, we have the way the pros do it, the bond line formula. This simple, clean, zigzag line is the ultimate shorthand. Each corner and each end of a line represents a carbon atom. And we just assume that the hydrogens are there, filling in the gaps to give each carbon its four bonds. It's fast, it's clean, and it's efficient. Okay, so we've got the carbon skeleton down, but what gives a molecule its actual personality, its character? Well, that's the job of the functional group. Think of it like a molecule's family name. It's a specific atom, or a group of atoms, that completely determines how that molecule is going to behave and react. Let's make this real with some examples you already know. You see that OH group? Boom, that makes it an alcohol, like the ethanol you find in drinks or hand sanitizers. What about that COH group? Well, that's a carboxylic acid, like the acetic acid that gives vinegar its sharp, sour taste. These tiny little groups define the entire identity of the molecule. Okay, now for a really cool, kind of mind-bending concept where things are not always what they seem. We're talking about isomers, molecules that are like identical twins who have completely different personalities. So what exactly are isomers? This is a super important concept, especially for your competitive exams, because it really tests whether you understand structure and not just counting atoms in a formula. So here's the crucial point. Isomers are compounds that have the exact same parts list, the same number and type of atoms, but those atoms are just connected in a different way. You could say it's the same parts, but a different design. And that different design leads to completely different properties. This slide says it all. Look at this. Both of these molecules, ethanol and dimethyl ether, have the exact same formula.
C2H6O. But look at how they're built. In ethanol, the oxygen is stuck on the end, making it an alcohol. But in dimethyl ether, the oxygen is sandwiched in the middle, making it something called an ether. Same formula, but one's a liquid alcohol and the other is an industrial gas. That's the power of isomerism right there.
All right, let's get practical. Out in the real world, whether it's in a plant or in a lab, chemicals are almost never perfectly pure. They're usually found in these messy mixtures. So, a huge part of chemistry is figuring out how to isolate the one compound you actually need. Let's talk about the art of purification. Chemists have this whole toolkit of techniques they can use. If they have liquids with different boiling points, like when they're separating petrol from crude oil, they use distillation. If they want to purify a solid, like making those perfect sugar crystals from sugarcane juice, they use crystallization. And for separating really complex mixtures, they use this incredibly powerful technique called chromatography. So here's a simple puzzle. Imagine you have a single drop of black ink. Now, you probably know that it's not actually just black ink. It's a mixture of different colored dyes. So how in the world could you separate them back out into their original colors? The answer is chromatography. It's a really simple but totally brilliant process. Let's just walk through the steps. First, you put a tiny spot of your ink mixture on the paper. Second, you just dip the edge of that paper into a solvent. Now, as the solvent starts to creep up the paper, that's step 3, it carries the ink along for the ride. But here's the magic in step 4. The different colored dyes in the ink travel at different speeds. The ones that are more soluble or stick less to the paper race ahead. And this difference in speed is what separates the mixture out into beautiful, distinct bands of color. So there you have it. We've really gone on a journey here. We started with carbon's 2 incredible superpowers. We learned the language chemists use to draw molecules. We saw how isomers can be like molecules in disguise. And finally, we looked at the practical art of purification. You know, early chemists like Berzelius actually thought organic compounds were special, that they could only be made by some kind of vital force inside living things. Now, we know that's not quite right, but his focus on carbon was spot on. Organic chemistry really is the study of carbon compounds. It's the chemistry of life itself and of all the materials that shape our world. Understanding these principles gives you the power to understand that world on a completely different level. So, I really want to leave you with this final thought. Is organic chemistry truly a difficult subject, or is it just a new language? Once you learn its alphabet, the elements and the bonds, and you start to understand its grammar, the rules of functional groups and reactions, the entire subject starts to open up. It's not about fear. It's about becoming fluent. If you found this helpful for your NEET or JEE prep, please do us a huge favor and hit that like button, share it with your friends, and definitely subscribe for more explainers that make these complex topics simple. Keep learning, and we'll see you in the next one.